This lesson is an introduction to some of the dynamic effects system built into Maya. This one is going to be focused on the NCloth system. Just to give you an idea what the NCloth system is, I've set up a basic scenario here. I'm going to go ahead and hit play on my timeline. Whoop. Watch this not work. There we go. All right, so there you go. You get this nice dynamic cloth that over time it collides with this cube, kind of like a tablecloth on a table, and it's still kind of blowing there in the breeze, right? So very easy to set these up. Lots of controls, lots of like nuancing to completely fine tune it and learn all the ins and outs. But we're just going to get you started on some basics today. Okay. All right. So how did I do this? Well, let's start a new document. I'm going to create a new scene here. All right. First thing we're going to do is just to even see all the effects tools. We need to come up here to the top left corner of your Maya window, and right now by default it's set on modeling. We want to go down to effects, so FX. You'll notice I've got a bunch of different window options, menu options that just came in on the top left. Also, we want to make sure your workspace is probably in the classic workspace instead of if you might be in standard. The reason why is we want to see your timeline, because to make your dynamic systems work, you have to be able to start using the timeline. You don't necessarily need to animate any of this. You can still take stills from it, and I'm going to show you how to kind of freeze one of these effects transformations and then be able to render it. But you still want to be able to let the dynamic system run, and to do that we need access to the timeline. So workspace on Maya Classic, and then your effects, your menu system on FX. All right, first of all, let's go ahead and create a piece of cloth. So I'm going to do a round form this time. Actually, you know what? This made my system crash the other day. I don't know why. Round structures were, so I'll just stick with flat, and we can avoid that for this tutorial. So I'm going to scale that up. Now, to make this look good, so to make it doesn't look like a bunch of tinfoil, because if you have too low of a poly count on your material that you're using as the cloth, it gets all crunchy looking, and it's going to look like tinfoil trying to wrap around an object. So I'm going to go to my attribute editor. I'm going to go to the poly plane. I'm going to go ahead and up these up to 50 on the subdivision. All right, so here's my NCloth, and now I can basically go up to NCloth, and I can say, as long as I have the plane selected, create NCloth. And that's about it for creating the NCloth. I can go back to, I can go to the poly plane here and move it upwards. Now the problem is if I play this, it falls, but has nothing to collide with, so you have nothing to tell you that it's cloth, right? So we really need to make this collide with something. Okay, so right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and create a cube. And I'm going to scale this up. Yeah, that's a good size. And now what I want to do with the cube is I want to designate the cube as a collider object, an object that this can collide with. Because right now, if I run it again, it's just going to do the same thing. It's just going to pass right through the cube like the cube's not there, right? I'm hitting the back button here, go to the start of playback range. Also, if you haven't already, to give yourself a little bit more playback range, right now I'm only set at like 120 frames, and this is running at 24 frames per second. So why don't we bring this up to like 500 frames, and then we'll have more time for that to kind of hang out. All right, so now I'm going to choose my cube, and I'm going to come up to NCloth again, and then I'm going to go to create passive collider. You'll notice now a few things have been added to my outliner over here. I have my plane, I have the NCloth object, I have a rigid object that was brought in as my collider, and then I also have this nucleus object. And we're going to talk about how these all work and what they kind of do here in just a second. But now that I have a collider and I have my cloth, let's watch the simulation. All right, here we go. Ooh, lovely, right? Not too bad. Now eventually if I let this run out, the cloth might slip off the object. We're going to talk about stickiness and gravity and friction and all these dynamic forces. I'm actually surprised. Most of the time it slips off, but I guess I had the size just right on the cube and it's staying pretty well. Cool. Now, don't scrub your timeline because it's going to give you really weird results. Every time you do a simulation, you're going to want to back to the beginning and then let it play again. You can have it stop and freeze wherever you like if that's how I like the look of it, like it's kind of blowing in the breeze, I can freeze it there. And then if I go to my edit and I go down to delete by type and history, then no matter what happens, if I back up, I now have my cloth is permanently frozen as that. I could delete everything else out of here, and no matter what, that cloth will always stay there. I can, continue to model it, change its shape, all sorts of things. But I'm going to undo all that. All right, let's see if I can back it up here. You know what, after I deleted history, there's no coming back from that. So I have to kind of recreate this real quick, and then we'll talk about it. So let me go back again one more time. I'm going to bring in a polyplane. Let's scale that up. Let's go over to the polyplane, subdivide it, NCloth, create NCloth. I'm going to go to my NCloth here. Just bring it up in the air a little bit, and then get my cube one more time. Scale it up. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And go to NCloth and create passive collider. Should be right back where we were. Yep. Okay, cool. So let's just take a look at all the little objects that were created in the process there. So first of all, my plane is still the plane no matter what. I could add more subdivision if I wanted to, just to make a smoother cloth, but whatever. NCloth, let's look at that first. So the NCloth settings, as I come up here and look in my attributes up here, we have NCloth, NCloth shape, nucleus, time, and polyplane. So the NCloth, there's some information in here, so I just want to fold these out. Definitely a little bit of information to work with, but NCloth shape, there's a lot more. So under NCloth shape, I have kind of, the collisions, the strength of the collision. I have bounce, friction, and stickiness are really important. So my friction is at 1. If I dial that down to nothing, it should make the cloth slip right off now. Wow, the cube is actually holding on pretty well. I'm surprised on that. Let's go ahead and bring in some wind and see what happens. So I'm going to go with bringing in some dynamic properties here, right? There's all sorts of stuff in here that you can work with, but most of the time what will happen is that cloth will slide off if you don't at least have some stickiness or friction in there. But let's go ahead and bring in, a little bit of wind. And I believe I might have to do that under nucleus as well. Yeah, so my gravity is set to 9.8. That's gravity here on Earth. If you reduce that, it's going to float down a lot softer. Actually, I'm going to bring up the wind speed just a little bit here. Now let's see what happens. There goes that slippage I was talking about. And then if I actually increase again, 500 frames, we'll get to see that again. We'll get to see it slide right off. So this is where that stickiness and friction really matters, like how much does the cloth stick onto the object, how much friction does it have, right? So if I go back to the NCloth shape here and I bring my friction back up again, say to like 1, I'll just type in 0.1, let's see how much that affects it. A little bit better. It's still sliding though. Eventually the wind gets it and pulls it right off. So we'll keep increasing this a little bit. We'll go up to say maybe like 0.5, and this time I'll also bring up some of the stickiness, and we'll see if we can get it to stick to the table a little bit more. There we go. Now it's holding. It's anchored on there. The wind is still blowing it around, but it's pretty much sticking to the table. So keep that in mind as you're working with it. To play around with those factors. Now you could bring in a little bit of bounce too. It might be a little weird on a piece of cloth, but let's see how it looks. Let's give it a little bit of a bounce when it hits. It's a little bit for more to work with, but actually that kind of slowed it down. It's surprising on the bounce. Bounce usually is something you'd work with more of like the end particle systems to get objects to kind of bounce around and have more dynamics. So there's a lot in here, right? You have collide strength. You can like bring down the collide strength on it as well, and you can see what that does. So it doesn't quite just like hit it with as much impact. I'm going to get rid of that bounce real quick because it's a little odd on the cloth. Let's bring that in again. Yeah, the collide strength, it makes it a little stiffer when that's up. I'm going to bring that, so if I go all the way to 1, there we go, versus no collide strength. Oh. passes right through, right? So you want it to collide, and you can play around with that to see how much the collision happens. You can also play around with this thickness setting here. Let's bring that up. It's making it calculate, but it's kind of like, how thick is the NCloth? Is it like a stiff cloth? Is this like a piece of felt or a piece of burlap? Or is this a piece of thin cotton? So again, I can bring that back up again and bring that setting down on the thickness, and then it folds in very nicely and drapes around like a little piece of silk. So there's all sorts of fun stuff in here. I'm not going to go over every setting. You have dynamic properties, stretch, shearing, deforming, all sorts of fun stuff. Obviously, we already looked at the wind, at least the wind field generation on that object, but the real wind settings, the main controls for the wind settings are coming under the nucleus here. Obviously, I can increase wind speed, and I can even determine like what direction it's coming from. Right now, it's coming from the X, but I could go turn that to 0 and make it have it come from the opposite direction. So let's bring that in, and let's increase the wind speed a little bit, and we'll see what happens here. Whoa, that's actually coming vertically, so it's blowing it up in the air. That was kind of fun, right? So maybe we want to put that back to 0 and do it on the Z, and let's see what happens there. There we go. Now it's blowing in the Z direction. It's trying to hang on. That stickiness and friction's actually doing a pretty good job. I'm impressed. It didn't get blown off, so we've got a windy little setting here. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty fun what you can do here. You can play with the thickness of the air density, the gravity, all that fun stuff. So a whole lot to play with. You can bring in a ground plane so that there's a ground plane that it would sit on as well and doesn't fall all the way through. And yeah, I think that's a good place to stop to get you started. There's a lot more in here, obviously, but that's a good place to start. Start with some NCloth, make a simple collider, and then we'll go from there. You will continue to use this create passive collider with other types of N particles as well, but all the other NCloth is in here as well. Future lessons we'll look at adding some constraints, some elements that kind of hold them in place. But remember, if you like that shape of where it's at, you can always go up to Edit and Delete by Type and History. And then even when you delete all this other stuff, and even the, whoop, I didn't mean to get rid of there we go. Now this guy's always going to be frozen no matter what time. Now I can kind of keep them in place and continuing to model it from there. Now I get rid of the cube, and no matter what, I've got this cool piece of fabric cloth that's kind of frozen in time. All right, that's it for a beginner intro to the NCloth system in Maya. Enjoy. Thank you.